So thank you, Gina. Especially I want to thank Patrick and David and Janine for inviting me to come today and talk about my research. And really express my appreciation to the Leadership and Talent Institute for putting on this event. I think this is a topic that's really important as we move forward as corporations, as public entities, and the impact that we can have on the world is all about having good leaders at the helm so that our companies actually do things that are beneficial to society rather than kind of detrimental to society. Now, what I want to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about three basic topics as we go forward, and that is, first off, why executive succession? We're really focused on C-suite succession at the Center for Executive Succession. So why is that an important topic today? And I'll let a few CHROs share that, their thoughts on that. Then we'll talk about C-suite failures and some work that we've done with regard to people that get put into C-suite roles that subsequently fail in those roles, and what are the causes and what are the consequences. And then we'll talk about, so what does it really take for organizations? How are they going about trying to build a sustainable talent pipeline? And so to give you an idea of where we're going to be going, or the foundation for this is really this research foundation. Starts with three things. One is our annual survey of chief HR officers. Every year for the last 8 years, we've done a survey of the Fortune 500 chief HR officers. We'll talk a little bit about some of the results we got from last year's survey. We're in the process right now of putting the final touches on the 2016 survey. Also, a couple of studies we've been doing that are more interviewing studies. One, we interviewed chief HR officers about C-suite failures and the causes and consequences of those. I say interviews, it's one of those things where if you were to tell me a story of a C-suite failure, that would be an anecdote. But if 10 of you tell me, it's research. And so this is the kind of work that we're doing right now. And then currently a study that we're interviewing external board members around similar topics, but these external board members who have been involved in multiple CEO successions and talking to them about what works well when you end up having a success and what are the drivers of failure in those decisions. So why executive succession? Rather than me tell you why executive succession, I want to go to a short video from some chief HR officers that are part of the center.
It's interesting because you find now that more boards and their succession committees are really focused on leadership, and they're focused on CEO succession as well as the C-suite succession. A reason why I think it's important is because for me it starts and stops with leadership, and identifying the right leader for that business at the right time is crucially important. And what you find is that you either develop people internal or you have to go out and you have to acquire talent. And there's a 50-50 chance of getting it right. But it's very costly when you make a mistake. So that's why it's important when you think about the size of an organization and the importance that leader has in setting direction and identifying the resources, being the champion for the organization. The board wants to get it right. It's very visible and it's costly when you don't get it right.
I think executive succession is becoming really important in boardrooms and for CEOs for a number of reasons. One, boards are becoming much more focused on risk in companies, and one of the areas they see great risk in has to do with CEO succession, or actually in general executive succession. It's a problem if you don't have a ready now bench and you don't have a place that you can turn to actually staff your most critical roles, and boards are becoming pretty concerned about the lack of bench or the lack of proven success in that space. CEOs are concerned because their boards are concerned, and the more a board gets concerned, the more pressure they put on CEOs and CHROs, and it's an area that I believe we really should address.
I think that succession for a company, especially at its CEO level, is critical to the success of the organization. I think boards have that as their primary responsibility for shareholders, making sure that companies have the right leader, and getting that right is something that I think boards are learning how to do that better all the time.
I think as the challenges in organizations and in industry overall become greater, there's more need for great leaders to lead through those challenges. And I think most companies always feel they can have greater and greater depth of talent for the different types of challenges they may be facing in the future. So succession planning and effective succession decisions are becoming more critical as the demands on organizations increase.
The numbers in the pipeline don't necessarily fit what we need from a succession standpoint. So if we talk about, senior leader succession, it's becoming more difficult all the time to fill the roles that we need to with the people that we need to that have the right capabilities. So one might say, okay, well, gee, we're working on it so much. Why is it so hard? And I think it's hard and it's difficult because to some degree, the complexities and the challenges of doing business today in a global environment, a global world, are kind of outstripping the pace by which people are really developing the skills and competencies they need to fill those jobs. It's basically a supply and demand issue where the demand is really, far-reaching and challenging, and the supply is, increasingly difficult to develop.
One is just the more focus that the board is putting on succession planning for the senior team and the CEO. The governance model of the business is pushing for it, but there's more and more of a recognition that many organizations don't do a good job of building a strong succession plan internally and also externally.
So much better to let them tell you than me, but one of the things that I'm going to blow through a lot of these slides pretty quickly because I brought multiples, about 60 or 70 reports of each of 3 different reports we have on these topics. However, FedEx did not cooperate, so they're somewhere between here and South Carolina. All of those reports are available online for free, though, as well. So you'll have access to all of these slides and all of the tables that I'll go through, but I don't want to waste a lot of time here on that. But just again, to give you an idea, CEO succession and C-suite failures are increasingly a problem. And in fact, some of our work shows that when we ask a pure definition of a failure that within a year you had to fire that executive, what you see is that there's a significant problem here. Roughly 40% of the CHROs said that they'd had at least one of those in the past 5 years of a C-suite failure. And the costs of these tend to be pretty immense. In fact, a study by PricewaterhouseCoopers says it's about an average of $1.8 billion in market value to hire the wrong CEO. And again, we've asked about this in our survey about the costs, and what you see is that external hires cost more than internal hires. These are direct costs only. In fact, it's the direct costs of salary, severance, bonus, et cetera, when you have to get rid of somebody. And just to give an anecdotal story, one of the people we interviewed was talking about one of their C-suite failures that actually cost them $20 million in direct costs of salary, bonus, severance to get rid of that individual. But in addition, that individual had created $40 million a year in infrastructure within the organization that they couldn't get rid of because they were a TARP company at the time. And so it actually was about a 1% hit to their share price as a result of making this mistake in hiring a C-suite executive. So in any case, just to give you one example of that, was we saw with McDonald's and their CEO being fired. This will give you an idea of what a wrong CEO decision can cost a company in terms of its stock price. So why is it that these failures happen? Really, as we've gone through these interviews and done the survey research, what we see is that there's really kind of 2 basic issues. One is the supply side in terms of the candidate characteristics, and the other is the demand side of board members and the kinds of mistakes they make as they're making these decisions. So we talk about the demand side. We asked the CHROs on last year's survey about the causes of C-suite failure. And what you see is that particularly with external hires, inevitably it's something about their personality. They don't fit with the culture, they aren't able to build relationships, they tend to have too much ego and not really listening to other people very well. With internal hires, the problem tends to be still an important problem about the ego and a failure to develop relationships, but there's also a problem that they just can't scale up. We think they were really good in their previous job, but we find when we expand those responsibilities, they're just not able to take on those additional responsibilities. In some of the interviews that we've done with board members, what you tend to see is an emerging dichotomy, and that is that the successful CEOs tend to be ones who are very humble. They seek feedback from others. They want to know what they're doing well, what they're doing poorly, and they tend to be rather unselfish. In fact, one CEO, after getting his pay, went before the board and was thanking them for the opportunity to work for this company. On the failure side, almost the exact opposite. These people that are very arrogant, they really will not listen to anybody. They think they know everything, and they're the kinds of people that are constantly asking for more salary, more perks, more bonus, etc. Now, on the demand side, through all these interviews, what we tend to see as we're conducting these interviews, and people, the CHROs and the board members that we interview are not really up in the social psychology and decision-making literature, so they tell stories, but as you hear these stories, you actually hear the kinds of decision biases that we talk about in the social psychology literature all the time. And these biases come out consistently. So one of them is in-group bias, and that is that we tend to favor people that are like us. And if you look at most executive teams and most boards, what are they? They're predominantly white males. And so there's a bias towards more white males, whether that's a C-suite job or a CEO job. The repetition bias is one of the ways that CEOs attempt to control who their legacy or who their successor is going to be. And that is that through every board meeting, they keep talking to the board about a particular individual that they think is the right person for the job. As they repeat that over and over again, suddenly there becomes a bandwagon effect, where board members hear the name, 2 or 3 of them start to like that person, 4 or 5 of them start to like that person, until all of a sudden everybody is on the bandwagon towards that person, regardless of whether or not that person is the right person. Once that happens, you see this confirmation bias and the inability to actually recognize negative information about somebody. Once we've got it in our mind that this is the right person, any negative information that comes in will tend to be discounted because we'll say, oh, that's just, it's irrelevant, or it's sour grapes, or it's something like that. In fact, one of the companies that we're talking to, they had gone down the path of just about being ready to make extend an offer to an individual to run one of their larger business units. And the board received a letter from a person that individual worked with at their other company who said, this is the worst person you could ever hire. Let me tell you about what an ego, how horrible they are as a leader. You should not hire them. And the board went ahead and hired them. Okay, discounted all the information. Part of that was this escalation of commitment. In their mind, well, we've gone so far down, we can't stop now. I mean, we've gone this far in the process, so we need to go ahead and extend that offer. And then last is the idea of overconfidence bias. Again, when you're talking about board members, these are very successful business leaders. They've run companies. They've been successful in their careers. Of course they're good judges of talent. One of the things that we find is that, in fact, they are really good business leaders. They're terrible HR managers. And they really don't have that eye for talent that they think they have. Now, given how bad this is in terms of the costs and all of that, what are companies actually doing to try and essentially do the right thing and hire and build a better talent pipeline? So, again, as we put together last year's survey, we looked through all the literature about what were considered best practices with regard to talent management or managing high potentials. And really 3 categories of activities came out in terms of what do they do to identify talent, what do they do to develop talent, and what do they do to retain talent. And so we put a bunch of items on there, and notice the response categories. 6 equals this is a critical part to our talent management strategy. 5 is it's a very important part of our talent management strategy. 4 is it's an important, and then go on down the list. I give you those so that when you see these numbers, it begins to give you a little context for what they think is important. As you get into the identification, not going through all of these, what you see is that virtually nothing is all that important. Really not spending a lot of time on identifying talent. The only thing that they seem to be close to important on is the idea of ensuring that there's a diverse pool of candidates. Virtually very little importance placed on assessing people using objective data to figure out who should be part of that C-suite talent pipeline. When it comes to high potential development, what you see is this is where it's most critical, and really the major thing is what are they doing to give visibility to the candidates, to the board, and to senior leaders within the company. So it's a combination of special projects, job rotations, leadership development programs. But again, you see a little bit with regard to assessment there, and what we see is that when there's assessment done with executives, it tends to be for developmental purposes, not for identification purposes. Let's figure out what your weaknesses are so that we can help develop those. And then in terms of retention, again, one item that comes close to being very important, and that's just tracking the retention of individuals. So when you look at all of these results, you kind of get a little bit frustrated, right? It looks like they're really doing very little with regard to identifying talent. Most of the focus is on developing it, and a little bit of focus on retaining that talent. One of the other things we did is we asked them, so is there anything innovative that you're doing with regard to your talent, particularly with the C-suite pipeline? And the answer that came back from that was nothing. Okay, when you ask them innovative, every answer just about began with, well, there's nothing really innovative, but what we're doing is, and what you tend to see is that, well, we're customizing things. Okay, so we've got a way of doing special projects and using special projects combined with job rotations, combined with assessments. So it's this idea of how do we integrate the different activities with regard to developing our C-suite pipeline and doing it in a customized way in our company. So yeah, everybody has a leadership development program. Everybody uses special projects. Everybody has job rotations, but we do it in a way that's unique to our company. And so again, as you kind of get to the conclusion here, what you see is that most of the activities are focused on development. The only real innovation is around integration and customization of kind of generic types of development processes. And one of the things we often see as a challenge here is how do you develop talent in a global environment when people are becoming less and less mobile? And that is a challenge that a lot of companies face today, is that they need their future leaders to have global experience, but with family ties and so on, fewer and fewer people are willing to take on global experiences. And so I'll close with, consistent with what the CHRO said on the video, and that is that this whole C-suite succession pipeline is an area of tremendous risk. And there's very little systematic research on what companies are doing to do it well. And one of the things that we've been trying to do with the Center for Executive Succession is to get behind the veil of the kinds of things that people can't talk about publicly. They couldn't get up in front of a group and say, here's what we did that was screwed up, here's the mistakes that we've made. And so we try to do that in a way that they can describe those things confidentially, and we can feed that back so that we can actually provide some rigorous data about the challenges and best practices with regard to C-suite succession, so that hopefully companies can build processes that will enable them to be strong in how they develop sustainable leadership within their companies. Okay, with that, let me turn it back over to Gina.
Thank you very much to Pat. Give it like you mean it, ladies and gentlemen. This is about the succession of your executives. Now, here's a question I have for you, Pat, and if you have any questions, please, throughout the day, be thinking of them, because we're going to try to provide as much Q&A time as we can, because we want this to be interactive. We want this to be sharing ideas, not just receiving ideas. Yes? Okay. Pat, if this is primarily for the C-suite, do you find that organizations would say they've given a lot of thought around how they're nurturing and how they're gauging and maybe a metric or a matrix for their staff, but they just haven't thought about, I don't know, the most important person to their organization?
Well, so actually, we were having a conversation at dinner last night, and John was talking about this challenge that I think a lot of companies face now, and that is that what we see is with limited budgets, companies are having to invest what they would say is, intelligently. And so that is, how do they invest more in their high potential talent and in their talent that's going to be high impact? And so you almost see a bifurcation of investment these days, to where more and more money is focused on an elite group of people, and less money is focused on the rest of the organization. I think that actually can destroy cultures. And in a lot of companies where customer service and operational efficiency are important, it actually is detrimental to the capability of the organization as a whole. But I think that's where we see a lot of the challenges today, is that focus on the high potentials and less on staff.
Okay, so you'd see the reverse in a way, actually. Any questions from any of you in the audience? Anyone want to put me to the test of how quickly can I run out to a table in the back? I do have one other, any hands? Yes, Mr. Professor Patrick Flood. Are you still mic'd up?
I hope so. Hi, Mike. Say hello to the microphone. I'm Mike.
Yeah, the double mic there.
It says hello back, that's when we get started.
I've got it's the voices again. Pat, one of the things I've seen in a large utility company here many years ago was where someone came from a very fast-moving US multinational environment, came into a semi-state environment, and they lasted 6 months because they literally couldn't take the culture. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts around the acculturation piece that might need to happen for that problem to be avoided?
Yeah, again, that basic issue came out frequently in a lot of the C-suite failure interviews that we did, particularly when you're looking at external hires. And it's this idea that somebody comes into a new culture, and the only kind of a person that's going to fit well in that culture is either somebody whose values automatically fit, or someone who is humble enough to say, okay, I need to kind of get rid of my predispositions, come in with an open mind, figure out how I can build relationships within this new culture, and rather than fight the culture, try and embrace the culture. And what a lot of those failures stemmed from was somebody who was just unwilling to do that. They came in kind of like, I'm the smartest person in the room, I know how things are supposed to go, I'm coming from this fast-moving environment, and this company needs to be more fast-moving, and trying to, rather than listen and learn, they're trying to jam their ideas into that. And again, like an antibody in the body, it just spits out those things. The culture is so critical to making whether or not somebody's going to be successful. But I don't think it means that people aren't able to adapt. I think certain people are unwilling to adapt. And that's one of the things, if you looked at the items we had, one question was that our culture is difficult to adapt to, but this person didn't make an effort, or our culture is difficult to adapt to, and even though they made an effort, they just couldn't do it. And it tends to be more that they just didn't make the effort.
Thank you. I know that I'm going to myself put ourselves at jeopardy for a question that I think is going to take a little time, but I'm dying to know, vis-a-vis the American political election and a particular CEO who doesn't fit the criteria on that right-hand side of the attribute list that you had. And you know where I'm going, ladies and gentlemen. How does your research equate vis-a-vis Donald Trump? We all want to know how this anomaly, we know it's a world question in all seriousness.
Yeah, so actually, I mean, if you looked at the other side of that, you would probably describe Donald Trump with
all three of those seem to be fitting him to a T, I would say.
Exactly, and again, that's my concern, and I say it with regard to candidate Trump, but I think you see it with President Obama the same way, and that is, there is this excessive ego to where they think they know all the answers and unwilling to listen to others and unwilling to admit that they may be wrong. And so I always refer to Donald Trump as being kind of like Obama, just with a very different set of policies. Very different policies, but the same basic nature.
I think that's very interesting. Thank you very much. Anyone, ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Professor Pat Wright. Thank you. Well done. Thank you.